All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're prying open the lid on the world's financial toolbox. We're going to figure out how these massive, world-changing projects, and sometimes entire countries, actually get the cash they need to get off the ground.
So let's just imagine for a second. A company has a vision for a revolutionary new factory, or maybe a country decides it needs a brand new high-speed rail network. These are incredible, game-changing ideas, right? But they also cost a fortune. So where does that money actually come from?
It's not like there's just one giant pile of money that everyone dips into. It's much more like a specialist's toolbox, and it's filled with all these different instruments, each one designed for a very specific job. So, let's take a look inside.
First things first, we've got to ask why this toolbox even needs to exist. And really, it all boils down to one thing: ambition. Think about it. Expanding your business across borders, developing cutting-edge technology, building massive new infrastructure, all of that costs a ton of money. It's simple, really. You can't make big dreams a reality without some serious capital. And that basic need is what powers the entire engine of global finance.
Okay, so let's get into the toolbox itself. When you open it up, you'll see it's pretty much organized into two main drawers. And these represent the two fundamental ways you can get funding. You can either sell a piece of your project, or you can borrow the money you need.
And the difference here really comes down to a classic trade-off. If you go with investors, you get what's called equity. You're selling a slice of your company, which means you also have to share control and, of course, the profits. With lenders, you take on debt. It's a loan, plain and simple. You have to pay it back with interest, but, and this is a big but, you keep 100% ownership. So in that first drawer, the investor's drawer, the heaviest duty tool you'll find is foreign direct investment, or FDI. This is about so much more than just cash. It's about getting control. This is when a company from another country invests to set up a real physical operation, like a factory or a headquarters, because they want a seat at the table and a direct say in how things are run.
Now, for a much more hands-off approach, there's foreign portfolio investment, or FPI. You can basically think of this as playing the global stock market. An investor is buying up assets like stocks and bonds, but they're doing it purely for the financial return. They're not trying to run the company, they're just hoping to make a profit.
So, how can you tell them apart in the real world? Well, the OECD has a handy little guideline, often called the 10% rule. Basically, if an investment crosses that 10% ownership line, it's usually considered FDI. It's a long-term strategic move for control. If it's less than 10%, it's almost always FPI, a more passive, short-term investment just looking for a return.
Okay, let's shut that drawer and open up the other one, the lender's drawer. The main tool here is something called external commercial borrowings, or ECBs. It sounds complicated, but it's really just a formal name for when a company takes out commercial loans or sells bonds to lenders in another country. It's the main highway for getting access to international debt.
All right, so beyond those two main drawers, our toolbox is just packed with all these other specialized instruments, and they're all designed for very specific jobs. Let's pull out a few of the more interesting ones.
Even a simple sale between two countries has a lot of risk. How does the seller know they're actually going to get paid? Well, there's a whole set of tools for this, and we can rank them by how much risk the seller, the exporter, is taking on. The absolute safest bet for them, getting cash up front. The absolute riskiest, shipping the goods on what's called an open account and just hoping the buyer pays up. The tools in the middle, like documentary credits, are pretty cool. They use banks as a kind of trusted middleman to make sure the deal is fair for everybody.
Now here is a really clever one: American Depository Receipts, or ADRs. Just think of an ADR as a kind of passport. It's a certificate that a U.S. bank issues, and it represents shares in a foreign company. And what this does is it lets that company's stock trade super easily on U.S. stock exchanges in U.S. dollars. It's like a backdoor for American investors to easily buy a piece of that company.
And finally, there's a tool in the box that isn't really about business at all: foreign aid. This isn't a commercial investment. It's not a loan that you're expected to pay back at market rates. It's voluntary help. We're talking grants, gifts, or super low-interest loans that one country gives to another. And it's usually for things like humanitarian relief, major development projects, or to help create political stability.
So we've seen all the tools in theory, right? But now let's see how this stuff actually works in the real world. We're going to take a look at how a huge, fast-growing economy like India
puts this entire toolbox to work to build its future.
You can see right here that India's strategy is basically to use everything at its disposal. It's firing on all cylinders. It uses those equity-based tools like FDI to bring in these big long-term strategic partners. But at the same time, it's also using a huge range of debt tools. Everything from massive World Bank loans for infrastructure down to smaller, targeted loans for local businesses. It's this really diversified approach that lets it fund growth at every single level of its economy.
So this is where things get really interesting. We know what the tools are. We've seen them in action. But that brings up a much bigger, more critical question. When you start using these tools, what are the implications? Who really holds the power here?
A huge risk comes from that second drawer, from borrowing. When a country takes on these large foreign loans, these ECBs, it gets exposed to something called foreign exchange risk. What that means is if its own currency gets weaker, the actual cost of paying back that loan can suddenly explode overnight. It's a really powerful reminder that even though these tools give you access to capital, they can come with some very serious strings attached.
And that really leaves us with the big, central question of our modern interconnected world. As all this money flows around the globe faster than ever before, is it mostly building bridges that lead to growth for everyone? Or does it risk creating dangerous dependencies where the borrowers end up at the mercy of their lenders? That's the complex, tricky reality of the global financial toolbox. Thanks for digging into this with me.